For those of you who like my cooling experiment videos, this is going to be one for the ages. Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff, and obviously this is going to be a little bit of a different video. Starting with this. This is the Tesla M60. It is a dual GPU card that was graciously donated to the channel a couple of months ago. Okay, about a year ago, but it has one major issue with using it, and that is that it has these weird, janky custom water blocks on it that I don't trust to put into a server. Now, the Tesla M60 originally shipped with a passive heatsink, just like all other Tesla GPUs, and I really don't want to just track one of those down, because I'm going to be left with the same exact cooling problems that all of my other Tesla GPUs have. So I figured, why don't I swap out the custom water blocks for something a little bit more streamlined. This right here is the ID Cooling IS30, and it is a super low-profile CPU cooler with 4 heat pipes and a 92mm fan. If you're new to the channel, welcome, and I'm going to answer your first question right now. No, this is not going to be done with zip ties. While I am a fan of some of the zip tie engineering that happens in this community, I tend to over-engineer my solutions. So today we are going to use my brand new CNC machine to make some custom aluminum brackets to mount the heatsink onto the Tesla M60. But wait, that's not all, because that's not all that needs cooled on the video card. I also have these heatsinks right here that I'm hoping to machine down to fit into the center section to cool down the VRMs. But first things first, I need a trip to the hardware store so I can get all the various bits and bobs that I'll need to actually pull this off. So, let's get started. Well, I was going to vlog the trip, but then I realized Home Depot probably wouldn't like me filming inside the store, and I didn't want to deal with that on top of all the anti-maskers that are around my area. So I decided to just go to the hardware store and buy the stuff that I needed. So first and foremost is this aluminum flat stock. This is 1/2 inch by 1/16 inch thick, and should be absolutely perfect to make the brackets for the IS30 heatsink. Now this is the underside of that IS30, and you can see there's a couple holes on each side, and those are normally used to attach to the brackets that actually bolt to the motherboard. I'm going to use this aluminum stock to create my own bracket and get the proper spacing to mount onto the Tesla M60. Now unfortunately, 1/2 inch is just a little bit too wide, so I will have to mill down a little bit of the side of this, but that shouldn't be a problem for my CNC machine. The second thing I needed was just some 1/4 inch ply stock. So these are 2 foot by 2 foot sheets that I'm going to cut down and create myself both a spoil board and a jig to mount my aluminum stock to, so we can repeatedly mill out these aluminum bars. Because I need to make 8 of these, I think? Yes, 8, because there's 2 brackets per cooler and there's 2 coolers per GPU. 8. Now I've already done a whole bunch of pre-planning for this project, and the first thing I made was this. This is actually the bracket that I need to make on the CNC machine. Obviously not out of PETG, but out of aluminum. So the spacing is correct. I have mounted it to the heatsink, and I have also mounted this to the PCB on the M60, and it is a perfect fit. So that's what we're going to recreate out of aluminum. To do that repeatedly, I made myself this little 3D printed jig that I'm going to fasten down onto the piece of plywood so we can put stock in the same orientation every single time and hopefully get pretty repeatable results. And with that, let's go ahead and get to milling. Alright, after all that work, I have made the world's crappiest boat paddle, I guess. This is the jig that's going to go onto the CNC machine to make sure that I get repeatable results for cutting out my brackets. Without trying this in the machine yet, I will say I am pretty happy with it thus far. These two screws down here have threaded inserts that are super glued onto the back, and hold the aluminum stock very, very flush to the board. Also, this board is cut so it is 100% square with the CNC machine itself. What I'm going to do is mill out the top section right here, and then all I have to do is break off the little bit of remnants that will be left, slide the aluminum stock forward, and then tighten it back up. And I should be able to cut multiple brackets in a row without needing to realign the machine in between takes. I guess all that's left to do is see if this works. One more thing that I didn't mention about the jig that I made is the 3D printed part has this little square cut out of it, so I can actually home my machine based on where I want it to cut out the bracket. Also, the top of it has enough slack so I can clamp down the top of the part as well as using these two screws on the bottom side. So again, hoping this is actually going to work. All right, now let's get it on the machine. So it was definitely a valiant first effort, and in fact, the spacing on those turned out just about perfect. This little dot right here is just a registration point. That's not supposed to be drilled all the way through. That's just so I know which side points in towards the heatsink. A couple of things I did wrong. Number one, my Z-axis is not quite homed in the way it should be, so it didn't quite poke through on any of these, although they are maybe like 5 thou from actually poking through. In fact, 3 of these actually have like bumps on the bottom side where it tried to start poking through. So I just need to set my Z a little bit lower, and I also homed this slightly further inside than I wanted to. It was actually going to start cutting into the support on the opposite side, and that's not what I wanted. I wanted this to cut completely in the aluminum within the support bracket. So I think I'm gonna have to just make a couple of quick tweaks, and we'll try again. Well, dang it. Attempt number 2, and we are so much closer. You can see we broke through 3 of the 4, and actually the 4th hole, there is a little bit of a pinhole of light there, so pretty much I can take like a punch and knock that out. The part did break loose pretty much how I wanted it to, but unfortunately I don't have enough pressure on the top of it to hold it in place when the bottom support is removed. So I'm gonna have to figure that out. I might even just, while the part is being machined, put a screw right through the middle of one of the larger holes and see if that'll hold it in place. Because once the holes are drilled, there's plenty of room for me to do whatever I want on the outside of the part, or on the inside of the part, rather. So I think that's what I'm gonna do moving forward, and we'll see how that goes. A quick trip over to my grinder, and I took care of all the leftover flashing from the failed part, and what I got was a working part. You can see that now this will mount right up to the bottom of that heatsink. Hold on, there we go. So I've got the 2 mounting holes for the heatsink itself, and then I've got 2 holes that I can mount to the Tesla M60. So I need to figure out how I can hold this down a little bit better, but the part is good. So, let's go ahead and make 7 more of these. Time for a new plan. I keep getting stuff that looks a lot like this, and, well, I think it's a limitation both of the machine that I have as well as the CAD software that I have. I'm not able to generate tool paths and change a lot of parameters. What I'm using right now is Meshcam 8, which is a fairly expensive program. It's about $250, but you plug in an STL file and then it generates tool paths for you, but you can't modify orders or anything like that. You just have to accept what it gives you. And what it's giving me right now is, number one, not quite working as well as I would need, and number two, my machine is causing a lot of chatter, and so all I'm getting is these really rough cut edges, and it's breaking away before I wanted it to in the program. So, new plan. I have made myself this with the 3D printer. This is a little template, which I can put over the top of one of these bars, which I can center punch out, and then drill the proper holes on my drill press. And I know half of you are probably screaming, he has a drill press right there, why isn't he using that? The answer is, because I didn't want to. I wanted to try out something on my new CNC machine. And unfortunately, this was just a swing and a miss. So, now we're going to punch these all manually and drill them out, and hopefully still wind up with a fairly good part. And secondly, now it's time to start diving into the larger heat sinks that are going to cool the VRM, and those will be on the CNC machine. So, I guess we're starting over now. I have cut all 8 of my brackets, and now it is off to the grinder. And yes, I understand the irony of using zip ties in this project. A little bit of time on the drill press and I have all 8 brackets cut, and obviously it was a lot faster than using the CNC, but I'm not going to get that machine finished look that I kind of wanted. But these brackets are going to be between a heatsink and a PCB. I'm not going to see them, so I really don't care how they look anymore. But now we move on to the part of the project that I've kind of been dreading, and that is creating a custom heatsink out of an existing aluminum heatsink. Because you can't buy custom shapes of heat sinks in quantities of 1 or 2. So I'm gonna have to take this, which is the closest thing that I could find, which is a 40mm by 100mm by 18mm tall aluminum heat sink, and turn it into a heat sink that will fit properly onto the top of the Tesla M60. Now the heatsink is going to go right here in the middle between the 2 CPU coolers to cool off the VRM, and it will be touching all of the VRMs that are right down in here. However, there's this massive choke right in the middle that is taking up a fair amount of room on the PCB, and I have to carve a space around that so I can mount the heatsink down and be able to touch the rest of the components. Number 2 is the only way that I can mount this heatsink to the PCB is drilling these 3 holes out and then threading them and screwing in from the bottom. So, I only have 3 of these heat sinks, and I need to do 2 of these cards, so I only get 1 practice shot of this. It's not that these are outrageously expensive, I just don't want to buy any more of them. So, I pretty much get 1 shot at this. Here's hoping. Alright, there we go. There's the bottom of it, straight off of the mill. And I have to say, that is not a bad finish at all. Now, obviously this is still just a $300 CNC machine. It's not the finest surface in the world, but that is definitely not bad. But the moment of truth is, will this fit onto the Tesla M60? So, here we go. Okay, it slots over the choke. Let's check our holes. You know, on 2 out of 3, I am dead on. The center hole is about a 1/2 mil up and a 1/2 mil right, but I think it's close enough I'm going to be able to use it. That is a success. And now for the part that I really haven't been looking forward to, and that's modifying the top section, that is the fins. These fins are still too tall on either side of this heatsink to fit underneath the low-profile CPU coolers that I'm using. So I have to cut off about 15 millimeters worth of fins on each side of this heatsink. Now, as you can probably see, I tried to do this with the mill already, and none of my bits wanted to do that. There's just too much chatter because there's not enough material here. So, I'm gonna have to do this the old-fashioned way. It is the next day, and after a very long night of doing some more work off camera, I finally have a heatsink that I think will fit onto the Tesla M60. But let's go ahead and recap where we're at really quick, because I know yesterday I got a little bit rambly at times. Starting with the mounting brackets that I made yesterday. You'll notice I added a couple little standoffs here. These are M2.5 standoffs that are 4 millimeters tall, which makes up for the difference in height between the PCB itself and the GPU die, meaning I should have the proper standoff height. Next up was to turn this heatsink into something that looks a little bit closer to this, so it would fit in between the two air coolers. I also hollowed out an area on the back so it would fit over the choke, and added some screw holes so we could actually mount it to the top of the PCB, and I think it just might fit. So at this point, I don't think there's anything left to do but start putting this together. And there we go. That is one fully actively cooled Tesla M60 dual GPU compute card. But it doesn't quite look like a video card, does it? I have one more surprise. At the very least, we need to put the I/O shield back on so we can actually mount this into a PC properly, but I figured, what's a video card without a shroud? So I custom 3D printed this two-tone nVidia shroud that will also cover the rear power connector and keep everything safe. How sweet is that? And finally, we are ready to actually test this thing and see if all of that work is actually able to keep this card cool. But more importantly, now that the power tools are all put away, I can finally have a beer. Now I know the question on everyone's mind for probably this entire video has been, why am I going through so much effort to cool the Tesla M60s, because I gave them a fairly unfavorable review about a year ago. There are a couple reasons that this card is enticing to me. While no, they did not perform up to my expectations when using official nVidia vGPU drivers and licensing, I knew there was probably still some meat on the hook here. You see, the main problem that I ran into was a power limit and how nVidia encoding was handled. So while the actual rendering performance was actually pretty good on these cards, the encoding stream that I would use to access via Parsec or some other method didn't have enough power or resources available to it, so the end experience to a remote client was pretty much unusable. But what if I use vGPU methods that are not necessarily sanctioned by nVidia, like telling the virtual machine that it's actually running a Quadro M6000? That is where things get a little bit more interesting. Last month, when I consolidated all of my virtual machines down to a single giant Epic server, I was planning on using a GTX 1080 for vGPU. I wanted Plex to be able to have hardware encoding, as well as run a couple of virtual gaming machines, and have my editor with a dedicated VM to log into to edit my footage remotely. With the GTX 1080 only having 8GB of video memory on board, I ran into the same issue that I did with previous vGPU experiments. That is, you cannot mix and match vGPU profiles with different amounts of video memory. So if I have a single 8GB profile, that obviously leaves 0 left for anything else. But if I wanted to give my video editor 4GB of video memory, that means I can only have another single 4GB profile active. Now I don't know if you know this, but Plex really doesn't need 4GB of video memory for NVENC. That means that any extra overhead I have after assigning 4 gigs to my video editor is pretty much going to be wasted. So what I really need is more than one video card in this system. Wait, isn't the Tesla M60 a dual GPU card with 2048 CUDA cores and 8GB of video memory per GPU? Yes it is. So now, here's the new plan. I can give my video editor a dedicated virtual machine with 8GB of video memory and 2048 CUDA cores that he doesn't have to share. I can also split the other GPU into 4 different parts with 2GB of video memory each, 1 for Plex and 3 for some 720p virtual gaming machines. But all of that is moot if the cooling mod that I did doesn't actually perform. So let's go ahead and test that out. Jumping on over to my Proxmox server, I have set up 2 brand new Windows 10 virtual machines, each of which has an 8GB vGPU profile, 1 for each of my GPU cores in the Tesla M60. First off, let's go ahead and see where my idle temps are sitting at. Looks to be 33 and 35 degrees Celsius. So at least I know I have enough contact with the die that it's not overheating just from being powered on. So far, so good. Go ahead and start up these 2 virtual machines, and we'll get to some testing. Each of these VMs essentially has 4 cores and 8 threads for my EPYC 7601, as well as 12GB of memory. Using Parsec, I'm just going to fire up Heaven Benchmark on both of these and see what the max temperature gets to. And let's go ahead and tessellate to the extreme, and might as well go to ultra quality. 1080p full screen, and run. Alright, there's the first one running. Go ahead and exit out of that, and we'll fire up the second one and do the same thing. So, ultra quality and extreme tessellation, 1080p full screen. There we go. We have both machines rendering, so let's go ahead and see what our temperatures are doing. And yes, I do know what the watch command is. I've been doing this for a while now. Now in this test, I don't have any kind of frame rate cap running. I'm letting the GPUs boost to as high as they want to go. And you can see both of them are running at around 99% utilization, which is absolutely perfect. When I run these in actual gaming VMs, I usually cap the FPS at 60, because anything else is just wasted and actually takes power away from being able to run other virtual machines. But so far so good, we're sitting at around 70 degrees Celsius on both of our GPU cores, drawing around 140 watts each. And I'm just going to let this run until those temps max out, so I'll see you in about 10 minutes or so. But for you, I guess it's going to be, and the testing is all done, including a couple benchmarks that I ran inside of Heaven just to verify that it was running at the right speed. So as you can see, we leveled out just a couple degrees above where we were sitting earlier, with one of the GPUs at 77 and the other sitting between 74 and 75, both of which still at 100% utilization and at 1177 megahertz. Now I will say I am cheating ever so slightly, as this GPU is currently installed into my air-conditioned server rack, which means the ambient temperature is around 60 degrees Fahrenheit or around 15.5 degrees Celsius. So definitely not a normal use case. However, being able to sit below 80 degrees is still very, very impressive. Now, I don't think I would be able to run these cards at their full 150 watt TDP in the dead of summer when my rack does reach upwards of about 85 degrees Celsius, even with the air conditioner on. However, these cards are only drawing about 135 to 140 watts during this test. So I think if I actually limited that down to 120, I wouldn't be sacrificing too much performance in lieu of being able to run these in 85 degree ambient temps. So, definitely not half bad for a result when I essentially ghetto-mounted 2 $25 CPU coolers onto the top of this GPU. Now, again, I'm a little disappointed I couldn't get my CNC to quite cut out the brackets that I wanted. Instead, I had to cut them out in a drill press, and they wound up a little less clean. But again, I was able to mount the coolers, so I'll chalk that up as a win. What I can say is machining this center heatsink down and getting it to fit was an absolute pain and one of the more difficult things I've done on this channel. Now, I will say I am very impressed with myself getting my CNC spacing correct on the first try, including the pocket for the choke, so this heatsink would actually mount down to the rest of the components. But none of the tools that I had at my disposal wanted to cut through these aluminum fins. very much less unsupported, and so I had to take a hacksaw and spend about an hour on the heatsink, cutting them down to size and then filing down the rest so it would fit under the two air coolers. But it's kind of hard to argue with the results, and I think this is where we're going to end this video. This was a heck of a lot of fun. I can't remember the last time I, number one, spent more time on a project, but number two, had this much fun out in my garage, being able to just work with my hands again. Now, I know this project was pretty niche and pretty much only applies to me and my use case, mainly because my Tesla M60s came with these epoxied copper water blocks that I really didn't trust long-term inside my server rack, so I needed to come up with some solution. But you can take some of these concepts and apply them to cards that you might own. However, do be cognizant of the TDP, especially on the IS-130 coolers. They're only rated to between 100 and 125 watts. Even the TDP on the Tesla M60 is 150 watts per GPU. This is not a mod you're going to want to run on the Tesla M40, for example, which has a 275 watt TDP on the single die that's on that card. However, the Tesla K80 might be another viable use case, but the spacing is going to be a little bit different than what I used here in this video. Overall, I have to say I'm pretty satisfied with the results here. I now have 2 GPUs inside of my server with 8 GB of video memory each that I can divvy out to various services, and that makes me pretty happy. If you like this video, you know what to do, and subscribe to Craft Computing if you haven't done so already. Follow me on Twitter at Craft Computing for daily shenanigans like this, and if you like the content you see on this channel and want to help support me in what I do, head on over to craftcomputing.store, pick yourself up a pint glass, hoodie, or t-shirt, and if you want to chat with myself or any of the other hosts from Talking Heads, think about joining my Patreon. Link is also down in the video description. Thank you all so much for watching this one, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys. Today's beer is from Breakside Brewing in collaboration with Barley Brown's beer. This is the Wanderjack IPA. I'm not sure what Barley Brown's brought to the mix, but I do know this is based on the Breakside Wanderlust, which is a classic Oregon IPA. Boy, even from this distance, I'm getting like orange peel and a little bit of, gosh, what is that? It's almost gin-like in the botanicals. Seriously. Yeah, orange, maybe a little like honeydew melon. Ah, crisp. Very, very crisp. And look how clear that beer is. I mean, that's just crazy.